Good to be with you, good to worship with you. And we're going to continue on in our study of the book of Mark. So if you have your Bible, you can turn to Mark chapter 10. We're going to be there this morning. And as you do, as I was prepping for this a little bit, came across a story in the mid-19th century. London was terrorized by deadly outbreaks of cholera. It was actually one of the leading causes of death for adults there in the city. And doctors and scientists were puzzled in terms of the root cause of the outbreaks. They couldn't quite figure out what was leading to this. And one of the theories, probably the main one, was that the outbreak was a result of airborne toxins. It was called the miasma theory. And as a result, the city government sought to clear the streets of filth, or they would flush it into the Thames River. They encouraged perfume to mask bad smells, hoping that would prevent the outbreak. All the while, the city was trying to clean up the air. Instead, the root problem wasn't being addressed. See, the root cause of this was completely unseen. It was bacteria that was hiding in the public drinking supply. And in 1854, a Dr. John Snow mapped out the deaths of some of the recent outbreak and traced them back to a single neighborhood water source. And he went to the local authorities and convinced the people that the city was drinking contaminated water, and that's what was leading to this outbreak that was killing people again and again and again. And so they turned it off, and lo and behold, the outbreak stopped. And a misdiagnosis of the source or the root problem and just focusing on the symptoms is something that can happen in all areas of life. If you think of going to a doctor and they treat a fever or a symptom, but ignore a deep infection, which is the source, the patient will struggle to get well, right? And I wonder if that happens in our spiritual life all too often as well, that we focus on the symptoms rather than the root source of the problem. Think about it like this. You identify maybe a sin struggle that you have in your life. And so you get angry. Maybe when you drive, right? People get in the left lane that should never be there. And you get mad about it. And you recognize, hey, this is a problem. And you take it to God. You confess. You try to change. And yet, the next time you get on that highway and someone's in the left lane, what happens? You get angry again. Or you get worried about something else. And what do? Maybe your thing you impulsively buy. And so you get on Amazon and the next day, your front porch is littered with boxes, right? And you recognize, you know what? Like, I should not do this. And you confess and you try to change. And yet again and again and again, don't we fall right back into the same pattern? Is it possible that part of the reason that we do this, part of the reason that we recognize a sin that we want to change, that we want to be different, and yet we fall back into it again, is because we're addressing the symptom and not the root cause? Well, in Mark 10, I think that that's some of what Jesus is doing, is that Jesus is identifying a symptom, yes. But more than that, he is going to a deeper layer, and he's looking at the root source from which that symptom flows and wanting to address that and help us to understand what that looks like. So we'll be in Mark 10. If you've been with us for a while, you remember we are working through the Gospel of Mark. And so we've been walking through it passage by passage. And as we've done, really going all the way back to Mark 1, Jesus appears on the scene and he is proclaiming the kingdom of God is here. That God's goodness, God's grace is come to reign in our hearts and our homes. He's making that invitation to the crowds. And yet at the same time, he is also calling his followers to him and helping them to understand what it looks like to follow him and to live differently than the rest of the world. And as a result, we're seeing these interactions that he's having with these followers, and we're seeing them take steps. Like Peter is making some bold statements that are true and display his faith. And we're like, right on. And then what we also see is they'll take these steps forward, and then they take steps back. And we just think, Peter, what are you thinking? Again and again and again, we see this from his followers. And I don't know about you, but for me, I find that so comforting. Because when I think about my walk with the Lord, how often it seems that I will take steps forward in faith with God, and then in the same breath, I will take steps back as well. And so I'll go to God and say, God, I'm trusting you with this job situation. God, I'm trusting you with my parents' health. I'm going to trust you in those things. And yet when it comes to this worry that we have about our kids, I'm not going to trust you. I'm going to cling to try to fix it myself. Again and again and again, we see these steps forward in following Jesus and then steps back. And we see it with them as well. And what we see again and again as Jesus is teaching them is that he is reminding them that following him isn't about getting him in line with what we want, but trusting him and getting in line with where he leads. That he wants us to get in line with where he is leading us and to trust him in that. And so we're going to see that when it comes to certain relationships in our life today. We'll begin reading in Mark 10, verse 1. Look at what he says there. Jesus then left that place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" "What did Moses command?" he replied. And they said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law," Jesus replied. So as Jesus is traveling around, he oftentimes has these religious leaders, these Pharisees, that will come and they will ask him a question. This is not the first time that they've confronted him. This is just the latest. And as they come and they ask these questions, these are bad faith questions. They don't really care what Jesus' response is going to be, as long as they're able to manipulate that to, in some ways, decrease his popularity or to show that he is not a true teacher. That is their motive or their desire behind coming and confronting him about divorce. And so they ask him about divorce, and this was a hot button issue at this time in Jewish society. In fact, there were two schools of thought about divorce and when it was okay to divorce at the time that Jesus lived. The first school of thought said that the only time that it was permissible to take that step into divorce is on the basis of sexual immorality. That was it. That was the only time that it was allowed. The second school of thought was really the majority view. The majority of people held to this view. It was that divorce was permissible for anything that displeased the husband. And so if the husband thought his wife was a bad cook, he could hand her a certificate of divorce. That got more laughs than first service, honestly. I don't know what that says about first service. Not a good cook, he could divorce her. Not liking the way that she interacts with his friends, he could divorce her. That he didn't like the way she looked anymore, he could divorce her. Anything just about a husband could divorce his wife for. So the Pharisees are trying to pull Jesus into this current debate and see which school of thought is he going to land in, and then how can we manipulate that to turn other people against him. And yet, if we're honest, divorce isn't just a hot button topic at the time of Jesus, it's a lightning rod issue today, isn't it? When you think of the broader culture, oftentimes divorce is easily accepted, often no questions asked. Even within the church, it's a difficult topic. The way it's handled can often be either too harsh or too lax. And as a result, as we look at this passage this morning, you may be here and this is a part of your story. Whether you've experienced it yourself, whether you're a child of divorce, whatever that is. And I just want you to hear as we get started this morning, our desire is not to turn up guilt or shame in your life. We want you here. See the way that Jesus interacts with this question. But what I want us to do is to look openly and honestly at the way that Jesus invites all of us to live. Because there's something for all of us this morning, not just some of us, to take from this passage. And so notice Jesus' response as these Pharisees try to trick him. He asks the question, what is Moses' command? What's Moses' command? So Jesus doesn't look to current views. He doesn't look to current thoughts, but he goes back to scripture. He says, what did Moses write in the Old Testament? Moses gave you 613 commands. Which of those give you any type of direction about divorce? 0. There's not one of Moses' commands that give any type of direction about divorce. The text that is mentioned here is Deuteronomy 24. And in Deuteronomy 24, Moses doesn't command anything. He doesn't even permit it, but he describes this situation and says, here are the ground rules for if a person goes this direction, this is what should be expected from them. See, rather than entering into the debate of the day or just addressing divorce as though this is the issue, Jesus looks deeper at the source of the problem and identifies that the condition of the heart is the root. Divorce is merely a symptom. And when he talks about hardness of one's heart, what he is talking about is this rebelliousness that we have, this insensitivity that we have to God. It's being cold to God's direction. I remember when I was a kid, I got to go to a camp several summers in a row and just had the time of my life, just made great friends. I felt closer to God. It was just a blast. It was incredible. And so after that first summer, I was looking forward to going to that camp every year. And after the third year, sometime before that next summer, my mom sat me down and she just said, hey, Jay, we're not going to be able to send you to camp this next year. It just doesn't work in the family plan. And she did not get that sentence out of her mouth before I put my fingers in my ears and I started saying, no, I'm going to camp. That type of unwavering stubbornness, that unwillingness to yield to another person, only focus on my needs, my desires, that's what Jesus is talking about here when he talks about this hardness of heart. And here's the thing, that's not something that just some of us have. That's not something that just some of us are guilty of. That's something that all of us, going all the way back to Genesis 3, all of us are susceptible to live in that hardness of heart in our lives as well. And that's what the brokenness in our world all stems back to that root issue. See, there are a variety of relationships that we could look at and we could say, there has been damage done in that relationship. And the problem is our hardness of heart. Here's our first point this morning. External problems have an internal source. External problems have an internal source. Consider all the problems that we see in our world today. Political polarization, abuse, self-centeredness, betrayal or unforgiveness within friendships, divorce, as mentioned here, all of them are all symptoms that flow from a deep internal root of hard-heartedness. And that sin nature manifests itself in 1,000 different ways, leading us away from a life that is obedient to God. And instead, it seeks to prioritize our needs, our desires as a priority over anything or anyone else. And Jesus is more interested in warning us of that hard-heartedness, than he is entering into a debate about divorce. And it begs us to ask the question, why? Why? Because every other teacher would love to talk about the social issue of the day. Why is it that Jesus isn't going to debate them about divorce, but he wants to talk about hard-heartedness? It's because trying to address relationships and fix external behaviors without addressing internal hard-heartedness is like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. It's never going to solve the issue. See, Jesus is more concerned about the root than he is the symptom. Divorce, no doubt, is a way that hard-heartedness shows up. As I talk to friends who have walked through divorce in their own life, they would not deny what Jesus says here. There was hard-heartedness in their situation, blame that they took, and this self-centeredness they saw in their spouse, but they also owned that led to the failure of their marriage. And they still are living with it decades later. They recognize it. See, Jesus is inviting all of us when he appears on the scene, not just some of us, all of us, to experience God's reign breaking into our world, into our lives, and into our relationships. And that means a different way to live. See, God's interested in all the areas of our life. including our most fundamental relationships, our foundational relationships. So whether you're single, whether you're divorced, whether you're married, whether you're a college student or a high school student, Jesus invites us to focus on our heart, knowing that's the source of brokenness for all that we face in our lives today. So Jesus next turns our attention not to what was allowed, not to what was permissible. He doesn't continue to talk about divorce. He wants to talk about how marriage was designed from the beginning. Take a look at verse 6. But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife. And the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this, and he answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. Now, Jesus, notice, nowhere here addresses divorce in terms of what's allowed. He does elsewhere, but not here. Instead, Jesus is more concerned with God's design. That's the altitude that he's interested in flying in this conversation. How did God design it going all the way back to Genesis 2? What is it that we should know about marriage and what God designed it to be? Well, we see a couple things that Jesus points out here and looking back at Genesis 2. They're helpful for us as we think about marriage and the beauty of it as God designed it. The first is that God is the one who unites a man and a woman together in marriage. It's not the government, it's not a judge, it's not a pastor, it's God. Look, I love getting to participate in a wedding. I've gotten to officiate lots of different weddings. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. Like when you're standing there in the center aisle and those doors open and the bride comes down, everyone looks back up there or back there first, and then where does every head come after that? Back to the front, and they're looking at the groom. You know why? Because he's a blubbering mess the majority of the time, because he's looking at his bride and seeing these two individuals unite together and getting to play a small part. Like, I love that. But God's the one who's doing it. God's the one who's uniting those two individuals together. That's what Jesus is saying here. God is the one who created marriage. He's the one who is doing the uniting as a man and a woman come together as one. That's what we see in the way that God designed it. The second thing we see is that the union between a husband and a wife that is in God's design is to be permanent. That stands the test of time. And so oftentimes as I meet with couples who are interested in me officiating, I say, hey, let's meet and talk ahead of time because I want to make sure that we're on the same page in terms of what the ceremony should look like. And over the years, I've seen couples do lots of different things in their ceremony. I've seen couples that, they'll pour sand, they'll light a candle, they'll do communion. Some even wash each other's feet. Like it was a beautiful thing. But I always tell them, okay, we can kind of mix and match different things, but there's one thing that is gonna be there. Like we're gonna do the vows, and we're gonna do the vows in those traditional ways. And most couples, they're great with that. They're like, yeah, I love the vows. Like there's a timelessness to them, right? And that's true. But something about the vows is the essence of the promise that those two individuals are making to each other and to God before family and friends. And so in that meeting ahead of time, I always say, okay, so you're going to say to each other in sickness and in health, right? And they're just, oh yeah, absolutely, in sickness and in health. And so typically what I'll do is I'll turn to the guy and I'll say, okay, here's the deal. In years to come, there's going to come a point in which your bride, your beautiful bride that you love so much, she is going to get sick and she's going to be throwing up in the bathroom and you're going to be laying on the bed. And here's your choice in that moment. You can pretend to stay asleep. You can pretend as though you did not hear. Or you can walk into that bathroom, pull her hair back, and try to comfort her in that moment. The vow begs you to remember, in sickness and health is the promise you made to God. And in that moment, it's being tested. So what are you going to choose? And so then in that meeting, I typically turn to the wife or the bride-to-be, and I say, okay, and so you both, you're going to say in richer or in poorer, right? And they're both like, oh, absolutely, yeah. And I say to her, chances are there's going to come a day when he's going to lose his job. There's going to come a day when he's going to be broke or in debt. And what are you going to do? You have the choice. In that moment, you can choose to be supportive. You can choose to be loving or encouraging. You can choose to accuse or to panic. The vow invites you to remember the promise you made to God. And in that moment, to show faithfulness to it as you show faithfulness to your God. That's the essence of what you're doing. See, the vows provide this permanence that God designed this relationship to provide. It's a beautiful gift that he wants us to enjoy. And the problem of our hearts, the hard-heartedness, the brokenness that we have, does not nullify that gift. That's our second point. Our brokenness cannot ruin divine design. God designed it as a good thing. We cannot ruin that. See, for many, marriage can be seen as good, but difficult. In 2016, if you go back and you look at New York Times, the most read article for 2016, remind you that was the year that President Trump won his first election against all odds. So you would assume, hey, maybe that was the most read article. Maybe there were other things that were happening in culture that were the most read article. The number one article in 2016, New York Times, why you will marry the wrong person. Why you will, not you might marry the wrong person, why you will marry the wrong person. Number one article. People again and again wanted to read it. Why? Because all of us who enter into marriage recognize it is hard work. There are two people with these hard hearts. They're trying to selflessly regard each other's needs as more important than our own. That is not easy. And yet all of us recognize it can be better, and we want that. So often in Re-Engage, our marriage ministry, couples walk in and they're frustrated. They're worried. They're doubting. They're angry. For some, they show up simply because there are communication issues there, and they want to try to fix that. For others, it's conflict resolution never seems to be something they're able to figure out. And so they're showing up wanting conflict resolution help. For others, they show up and there's trauma that they've experienced as a result of things that have happened outside the marriage, and they're bringing them in. It's having negative impact on their relationship. There are a host of other reasons that couples will show up there. And yet for all of them, they're showing up because they recognize that despite all the junk, all the baggage, all the stuff that they face that's been difficult and hard, they recognize that underneath that, marriage can be something good, and they desperately want to experience that, whether for the first time or again. And the temptation would be to just give them some quick tips. Here are a few conflict resolution suggestions. Take these, go and be blessed, right? Yeah, that's not what we do. That's not where we start. Instead, we start with where Jesus did, with God's design for marriage. And listen, when we remember that, when we go back and look at the way God designed it at the beginning, all of a sudden it helps us to understand some of the challenges that we face, some of the brokenness that we experience. We understand that, yeah, that might be difficult, but God designed something better. And it establishes a stronger foundation for that relationship moving forward. Because we understand the way that the Creator designed it to be. And if you're married and you're here today and you've never been through Re-Engage, actually, if you've been through Re-Engage, I encourage you to do it again. It is one of the best things that Jen and I have ever done, not just for our relationship with each other, but our relationship to God. And it provided us with a season in which we were able to focus on ourselves, focus on changing some of our behavior, and just work on improving that and the ways in which we loved each other and experienced the good gift of marriage the way God designed it. See, Jesus wants us to remember God's good and beautiful design for marriage. And I don't know about you, but when I see some of this, when I think about some of those vows that I would have made, I can feel inadequate. In a world that is broken by sin, avoiding the minefield that is marriage with the variety of ways that my hard heart can blow it up seems impossibly difficult. So how do we heed Jesus' warning about hard-heartedness? Well, Jesus answers the exact question in the very next section. Look at verse 13. So people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. And when Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. Now, how many of you are World Cup fans right now? I'm not saying all the time. I'm saying right now you're a World Cup fan. Okay, I see like 11 hands. Awesome. Okay, so if you are and you've seen, and we're thinking about this scene that Jesus is in, I liken it to the way in which I see these Argentinian fans responding to their favorite player, Messi. And it seems like some of them try to take their child and just kind of put their child in Messi's path so that his soccer skills will be translated osmosisly to their child, right? And I can't help but wonder if that's what some of these parents at the time of Jesus are thinking. If I can just get my child to just kind of touch Jesus's robe, we've seen stories like this already. Maybe in some ways, his blessing, his favor before God will be transmitted to my child. And so it's chaos. These parents are doing what they can to get their child there. And so the disciples, Jesus' best friends, mind you, they know how Jesus ticks. They understand what his priorities would be. And so they're going to do him a solid. And so they decide to be his security force. And so they decide, you know what, my best friend, he's too busy, he's too important, he's too significant to spend time interacting with kids. And how does Jesus respond? He's furious. He's indignant that his friends would miss this. And so he allows the kids to come to him and he blesses them. He takes them in his arm. It's not like he just quickly takes time, but he brings them into his lap. He meets them where they're at. And notice what he says, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. Now, if I were to ask the crowd, once again, we'll see how interactive y'all are. When you were a child, did you ever hear, either from your parents or another adult, grow up? Hands? Oh, y'all are just lying. There are way more of y'all that would, still there. I love that. Yeah, we do that to kids all the time, don't we? We tell them, grow up. And think about the scene here. Jesus is surrounded by adults and kids. And he looks at the adults and he says, he doesn't look at the kids and say, grow up. He looks at the adults and says, hey, could you be more like them? Could you be more like the kids? What's he saying? What's he saying about his kingdom that we don't want to miss if we're going to follow him the way he invites us to? Because there's something here about becoming more like a child that Jesus is doubling down on for all of us. See, Jesus recognizes that this idea of becoming like a child is something that we all need if we are to enter into the kingdom the way he invites us to. See, there's an essential element for all of his followers that he wants to be true. And kids got it. Kids have it naturally. It's dependence. Kids are really good at trusting. Young kids especially. Adults want what they earn. They want what they deserve. They want what is their right to get. Whereas children are open to what they receive as a gift. They're dependent on another to provide. You know, my youngest kid, he wakes up every morning and he doesn't wonder if he's getting breakfast. He trusts that mom or dad is going to get it for him every single morning. And most mornings we're good at it. It's only as we become like a child who's dependent and trusting that we're ready to receive and fall in line with Jesus' kingdom, his everyday direction for our lives. See, in making this statement, Jesus provides us with the solution, the cure to our hard hearts. See, our last point is this: internal problems require an internal change. See, the root of the problems that we face whether it be within a marriage or more broadly with any other relationship, stems from a hard heart. That's an internal problem. We're proud, we're self-centered, we're cold to God, we're cold to other people. And to address that problem calls for a change at the exact same heart level. Becoming like a child is trading the heart of stone for a heart of flesh. A child is vulnerable, humble, completely dependent and receptive to another. Becoming like a child is an exchange of self-reliance for dependency upon the Lord. The greatest threat to God's kingdom ruling in your life is not something out there. It is a dangerous thing that is already in here. That hard heart can shipwreck what God would want to do in your marriage, as a parent, as a roommate, or a friendship. In all of those relationships, that hard heart can overthrow his reign in your life. And the solution to that problem is found in becoming more like a child. See, Jesus takes a child and he makes it crystal clear that to be accepted before God comes not by becoming more independent, not by becoming more adult-like, but by growing and becoming more childlike. The life that Jesus invites us into is not a moment of dependence. It's not we trust him once and we say, "Oof, glad I got that over with." But it's a lifestyle in which we continually come back to him, trusting and resting and looking to him to give us what we need. See, it's a recognition that in all of life, apart from him, I can do nothing. And so I'm just going to remain here, resting and trusting in what he's going to give and provide. See, it's all too easy to focus on the symptoms rather than looking at the root problem. And Jesus invites you to look to the source where everything else is flowing in your life and address that. Address that propensity for a hardened heart. What would it look like this morning for you to begin to become more childlike? To experience that softening of your heart as you walk in more dependence upon the Lord. A few weeks ago, my family and I, we met my brothers and their families down at the beach. My kids don't like sand, which typically goes with the beach, and so we don't do it very often. So we were like, okay, we're going to do it this year. And so we met them down there. There were 15 of us under one roof, so it was pure chaos a lot of time. There was some sleep, not enough for some of us, but it was so much fun. And the last night, we were just kind of soaking up all the time, all the memories together. Last night, I'm walking through, we're trying to make our way back to the place where we're staying, and we're going a different way. We kind of got lost, and I was with some of the kids, and then some of them were running up ahead, and there were cars kind of coming in and out. There were people running all around, and I looked down my side, and my 7-year-old niece is just standing right there. And this car kind of backs up and then kind of moves forward, and all of a sudden, she kind of grabs my hand. And I looked down at her and I'm just like, you want to hold hands the rest of the way? And she looked up and she was just like, yeah, absolutely. And I can't help but wonder if in that moment, what she's doing is she is looking out in the darkness. She's looking at things that she is unsure of. She's looking at people that she does not know, and she is scared. And she is feeling these feelings and waves of doubt and worry. And in that moment, she needs someone to cling to walk her through the scary things of life and get her to the destination she ultimately needs to be at. And friends, I don't know if there's any better image for what Jesus offers to you as well. That he offers to be a God who is present with you, walking through the scary things in this life and to get you ultimately to the destination you need to get to. But what he invites you to experience is not you doing it alone, trying to be big and accomplish it through your own strength or wisdom, but instead to cling to him, to hold his hand, and to trust him to get you where you need to go. Oftentimes in this moment, I close in prayer, but what I want to do is I want to invite you right where you're at, just to have some quiet time to pray and to ask the question, God, where is it that I am living in my own strength and not living like a child? Trusting in you, reliant upon you to provide what I need. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's your workplace. Maybe it's in your neighborhood or with a family member. Wherever that is, though, invite you to, right where you're sitting, just take some time to pray and just have the posture of this. Just open your hands. There's nothing mystical about this. Open your hands just as a posture of receiving from God what it is that he wants to give you in these moments. Our worship team's gonna come out. They're gonna kind of play underneath that and then invite us back to worship with them as we close.
Hey, thanks for watching. If something you heard resonated with you today, we would love to connect with you. Visit doxology.church/connect or leave a comment below. And if you enjoyed today's message and you want to see more, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new videos.